I'm Owen Bigland. This is the Inside Edge video blog. Okay, time for me to do another blog on strata fees. Every year or so, year and a half, I do one. I've done many over the years. You can always go back in my archives and look at some of the videos I've done on strata fees over the years. But the last couple of weeks here, I've had a few, and it's always a reoccurring question I get. People will ask, Owen, strata fees. I mean, if a strata has got a high strata fee, is that a red flag? Is that a warning sign? And vice versa, if strata fees are low, is that also a warning sign? Is there a sweet spot with strata fees? And yes, there is. So let me just summarize a lot of it I've talked about in an older blogs, but now with the insurance situation going on now, with the insurance rates going up 100, 150%, a lot of stratas now are looking for ways to fund that. And it's either through special levies or upping their strata fees, or what I prefer, maybe a combination of both. So, you know, when you see a condo listing and it seems to have a high strata fee, so let's say it's a one bedroom and den, 650 square feet with a $550 maintenance fee, that can be a red flag depending on how old the building is. But you also have to dig a little deeper and don't judge a book by its cover is what I would tell people. Strata fees are all over the road. You have to do some research on it to see what exactly is going on. Now, sometimes when you have a high strata fee, sometimes that can mean, you know, they've had some issues in the building, maybe the insurance has skyrocketed, and they're funding the insurance increase via the monthly strata fees. Now, personally, I think that's a mistake. You know, if you get a 100% increase in your insurance, which a lot of stratas have gotten here in the last year or so, I'm under the belief that, you know, you should probably just levy the owners for that and not pump it all up into the strata fees, or maybe bump the strata fees up by 10% or 15% to fund part of it and then levy the difference. Because something you got to remember with special levy or with strata fees, yes, a lot of people, when they see a high maintenance fee on a condo, immediately cancel it off their list. And that's a mistake. This is something that your realtor should do a little more due diligence on, because it doesn't always mean that there's trouble there. The other thing is, you know, the strata could be deciding to fund their CRF heavily. In other words, they're building up a very large contingency fund, pumping a ton of money every year into that, no matter what year the building is, what age it is. Because when the repair and upgrades need to happen, like elevators and roofs and boilers, they want to minimize the special levies or avoid them altogether. They want to have the CRF funded. Now, this is a mistake too. I'm not a huge fan of, you have to, by law, by the Strata Act, pump a certain amount into the contingency fund. I'm under the belief you want to be about in the middle. You want to put in some money, the mandatory amount, minimum amount, maybe a little more, but I wouldn't go too much more than that for a couple of reasons. A, you know, when the money goes into the contingency fund and you're pumping a ton of dough in there, if you decide to sell your unit down the road, you know, you don't get your share of the contingency fund back out. You know, the strata keeps that. Also, you know, you're pumping that excess money in there. It's going into the strata's coffers, which is going into a bank account, earning zero interest. I'm under the belief, and I've talked about it many times before, that sure, we'll put some money into the CRF. But I look at the CRF really not to cover all the upgrades and remediation work down the road. I look at it as more of a buffer to help soften the blow a little bit. So if you eventually need to have a new roof put on a building for, let's call it $300,000, you know, I'm under the belief a good way to go is if you've got $600 or $700K in the contingency fund, maybe take 100 or 150 out of the CRF and then levy the owners for the difference. And as an owner in the buildings I own in, my investment units in principal residence, I would rather cut a check for that difference. Sure, take a little money out of the CRF, but levy me for the rest. Because I'm under the belief I'd rather hang on to my own money rather than pumping it into the CRF, which is, you know, you're not earning any interest on it. I'd rather hang on to my money, invest it, keep it in stocks or whatever. And when the time comes that you need $1,000 from me to put a new roof on, I'll cut you a check for it. There's a bit of a happy median there, but stratas are all over the road. There's many stratas that have decided, hey, we want to fund this CRF heavily. We're going to bump our maintenance fees way up. Let's call it $600 a month per owner. and 200 of that every month is going straight into the CRF. Now, again, it elevates the strata fees. It will turn off some buyers who don't dig a little deeper and say, well, hey, the money is going into the CRF. It's not because there's issues right now. But again, it all depends on the strata. In some situations, it can make sense. For instance, I've had lots of stratas in East Vancouver, Richmond, New Westminster that I've sold that are generally older stratas where the demographic of owners in there tends to be older. Older residents, many of them are retired, some of them are on fixed income or pension income. So in those cases, they decided to kind of spread the risk out via the maintenance fee. Let's bump up the maintenance fees, pump more money into the CRF so that when we do need an elevator upgrade or a boiler or a roof or whatever, we can fully fund it out of the CRF. It lessens the shock to these older residents that may not be able to come up with a spare $2,000 in a levy. So let's just pad it in monthly and pump up the CRF. They vote on these things, as people know. You've got to get a vote, 75%, to approve a strata increase or approve bumping up the CRF funds. So maybe in those situations, an older demographic, they want to fund everything for the CRF, it can make sense. But again, just because you see a high maintenance fee doesn't mean that it's a bad building. You got to do your due diligence on it for sure, because the reverse of that is a low maintenance fee. Very low, they don't have any money in the CRF, and they're just not taking care of the building. They're not paying enough into the operating fund to maintain the building properly. So there's two sides to it. But there is a sweet spot, as I say. You want to be contributing a fair bit of money into the CRF, not overdoing it, not keeping your maintenance too high or too low. But again, it's on a case-by-case basis. Don't let what you, at first blush, see the maintenance fees are high, it's got to be a bad building. That's simply not the case. There's lots of good buildings out there that have a little bit higher maintenance fee. The other thing, too, is in a lot of buildings in Vancouver, especially when you get into older buildings, you've also got to ask yourself, what do those maintenance fees include? In some buildings, you've got hot water heat. So if that's the case, the hot water is built into the maintenance fees. Your heat and hot water are built in. You don't have to pay for hydro for baseboard heating, just for lighting. In places like Richmond, which work off a metered water, some stratas have gone to metered water. Not to bore you with the details, but in Richmond, you get a property tax every year, but you also get a utilities tax. And that utilities tax is basically the same amount as your property tax. On a 2-bedroom condo, it's over $1,000 a year. In some condos in Richmond, they've installed metered water. They've bumped up the maintenance fees, but they've added the water tax onto the strata's maintenance fees. So you do not get that $1,100 bill every year. So you got to dig a little deeper. Sometimes it'll include the utilities tax, hot water heat. There's no right or wrong. You got to do your due diligence on it, but there is a sweet spot. As I say, personally for me, I want to put a little money into the CRF for sure, but I don't want to go overboard on it. All I want that CRF to do is help soften the blow when we need a new roof or a new boiler or elevator upgrades. Maybe take 30% out of the CRF and levy me for the other 70%. That's the best way to do it, I think. I'd rather hang on to my money and write a check when we need it. I'm Owen Bigland. Oh, one final thing I'll say too. I have noticed some stratas with the insurance increases have funded all of that through the insurance. So they bumped I had one recently, strata fees went from $350 to $550. And they funded the entire insurance increase, which was substantial, 150% increase, via the strata fees. That was a mistake. Don't do that, folks. Now you've got a $550 maintenance fee on a 1-bedroom condo, high. You would have been a lot better off there, sure, bumping up the maintenance fees by $20 or $30 and then levy everyone the difference, because in those cases, it is turning off buyers when the maintenance fees are that high. But you got to do your due diligence. There's no right or wrong here. Every building is different. I'm Owen Bigland. As always, I'll see you next week.